This story begins by showing the night atmosphere of the San Fernando Valley in 1977. Many people visited one of the most well-known clubs there called the Hot Tracks, owned by a man named Maurice Rodriguez. That night, a special guest named Jack Horner, a famous adult film producer, and his partner Amber came to the club. When he entered there, Jack's attention was diverted to a new waiter who seemed to be very young. When he had the opportunity, he met him and got to know him. But at first, the young man, whose name was Eddie, thought that Jack was a gay who wanted to see him please himself, so he charged $10 for the service. Jack just smiled when he heard that. He immediately introduced himself as an adult film producer and was not the least bit interested in the services that Eddie was offering. Who would have thought that Eddie had also read the article about Jack? He could even name 2 film titles made by Jack. After that, Jack invited Eddie to chat at his table, but Eddie refused because it was still working hours. Eddie was a 17-year-old man who lived in a small town quite far away from San Fernando. From a young age, Eddie dreamed of being a film actor. There were lots of posters of his idol actors such as Al Pacino, Bruce Lee, and many more. Besides that, he was stubborn and didn't want to go to school. His mother reminded him several times that he should go back to school, but he always ignored her. The next night, Jack managed to get Eddie to chat. There was Amber and a young woman named Maya, too. Jack then explained how he made a film and what criteria he needed for his actors so that people would like his film. Jack said that Eddie was suitable for being an actor. And according to the information he got, Eddie also had great stamina in bed. Jack planned to invite Eddie into his team, but before that, Eddie was asked to make love with Maya and Jack wanted to see in person. The 2 of them made love at Jack's house, and Jack was very amazed by Eddie's performance, and the most important thing was that Eddie also had a decent-sized private part. When Eddie returned home, his mother confronted him. She was very annoyed because he always came home late at night and was always indifferent when asked to go back to school. As usual, Eddie tried to ignore her mother, but this time his mother was very disappointed because she also found out that he worked at a nightclub. She could no longer control her emotions and kicked Eddie out of the house while saying that he was a loser who had no future and was too stupid to go back to school. Before leaving, Eddie swore that he could be successful even though he didn't graduate from high school. Having nowhere to go, Eddie decided to crash into Jack's house and coincidentally found himself in an ongoing party attended by important people from the world of adult film. Jack introduced him to several people there, such as Buck and Becky, one of the couples that Jack often used in his films. After that, he was also introduced to Reed, a former street magician who changed his profession after being invited by Jack to become an adult film actor. Eddie and Reed. Morris was also present and chatting with Amber. He was apparently interested in becoming an actor and asked Amber to persuade Jack to invite him. Meanwhile, Eddie enjoyed the party and even got to know several people which would later help his acting career. Jack introduced Eddie to a man called Carnal, the person who financed the entire film production, or could also be said to be the main sponsor. At that first meeting, Carnal said that he wanted to see Eddie's private part, which according to Jack was very big. And when he saw it, he could only remain silent, and then said that Jack was telling the truth. Before leaving, Colonel asked Eddie to look for a good stage name. After the party was over that evening, Jack, Reed, and Eddie chatted about the fun of the party this afternoon, and Eddie said he already had a good stage name. He was very sure that he wanted to use the name Dirk Diggler as his stage name because he thought the name was very cool and easy to remember. A few days after Eddie's first film shooting started, Jack checked the entire team's readiness, including the completeness of the props. Bill, one of the crew there, reported which scenes would be shot that day, where one of the scenes would be Eddie having intercourse with Amber. Eddie would act as a former officer who had just returned from war and wanted to realize his dream of becoming an actor. Before the filming, Eddie said words of encouragement to himself because it turned out that doing real acting made him nervous. Luckily, he got good support and enough time to calm down. When he entered the studio, Jack directed Eddie to stand behind the door and then entered when he heard the signal. Eddie obeyed the instructions and shooting started very smoothly. He even really memorized the script and said his part very clearly. When the intercourse scene was about to start and Amber began lowering Eddie's pants, the studio became very quiet. Everyone could only be stunned when they saw Eddie's massive private part. Moreover, he could go on for so long that the crew ran out of film rolls and was forced to stop the scene because Eddie hadn't reached the climax. When the film roll had been replaced, the scene continued, and after a long time, Eddie finally climaxed. But both Eddie and Amber's instructions. Bill suggested that Jack use the final scene with a saved clip from another actor, but Jack refused because the result wouldn't be the same. Suddenly, Eddie surprisingly offered to re-record the ending part because he admitted that he was still capable of doing another round. After the shooting process was finished and the film was shown in cinemas, surprisingly, Eddie's first starred film was liked by many people, so the profits that Eddie got were no joke. He and his friends spent hundreds of dollars on shopping and clubbing, including buying expensive luxury clothes. The success was also celebrated at Jack's regular club, Hot Tracks, and this time, Eddie wasn't there as a worker, but as a famous actor. Jack, along with his entire team and Colonel, celebrated Eddie's film achievements by drinking. No one thought that the film would sell quickly and provide profits beyond expectations. Not long after that, Eddie returned to star in a film produced by Jack, and this time he was paired with Maya. In this second film, it seemed that Eddie had started to get used to his acting, and this made his appearance in the film better and gained more fame. The second film sold well on the market, and in an instant, Eddie, who was a newcomer, became an idol for many people. His name attracted attention in the adult film industry and was often written about in newspapers and magazines. Everyone admired him, who was still young and full of energy, especially when doing adult scenes. He had a lot of money, not only from acting, but also from modeling for magazines or advertisements. His famous actors that previously Eddie could only see through a poster in his bedroom. His popularity skyrocketed very quickly. He even won 3 awards at the same time in Adult Film Awards. In the late 70s, Eddie returned to starring in a film directed by Jack, this time accompanied by Reed as his partner in this film. Morris got a small role as a bartender, and this role was enough to make him happy. Overall, this film was a parody of James Bond dominated by adult scenes. Eddie was depicted as a brave hero who never hurt women, while Reed was an assistant who always supported him. After it was launched, the film was accepted in the market. This time, Eddie was able to buy his own house, a very spacious and luxurious one. Each room had its own theme and was filled with items imported from abroad. All the themes followed Eddie's various tastes and hobbies. Even Eddie's bedroom was designed in an Asian style because Eddie loved karate. He also bought a new sports car and took Amber for a ride. Meanwhile, the adult film industry continues to run until the end of the 79th stress on New Year's Eve. Before heading into the 80s, Jack held a massive party in his yard. The party was attended by many actors. Gondoli. Gondoli was a businessman who owned several cinemas in San Diego and San Francisco. He came there to have a business with Jack. He said that soon cinemas showing adult films would decline in popularity and advised Jack to distribute his films using cassettes because people started to have their own projector screens, and he would help Jack distribute the cassettes so that both of them made a profit. Unfortunately, Jack rejected the proposal and vowed to never make his films on cassettes. He insisted on keeping his films in real form and showing only in cinemas. Moreover, he suspected that Gandali only wanted to make more profit from selling cassettes. He ended the conversation and said that the conversation might not continue for some time. Apart from that problem, some other things happened at the party, including Becky finding a man who attracted her attention. The man talked about love and seemed to understand love according to Becky's thoughts. The man also worked as an engineer, which made Becky even more interested. On the other hand, Bach also found a woman who attracted his attention. The woman was an adult film actress who had the same view of things as him. Eddie, on the other hand, got an expression of love that he didn't expect from Amber, who he had always respected as a senior, loved him as her junior, but also as a man. The two of them enjoyed cocaine together, and it was Eddie's first experience consuming drugs. The new year was just a few minutes away, and everyone gathered in the living room to toast and count down the seconds. One person in the crowd, Bill, looked confused. He looked for his wife, who was nowhere around the crowd. When he passed a room, he heard his wife's voice faint, and was shocked when he found his wife sleeping with another man. He didn't say anything and went to his car, took a gun, and without saying anything, shot his wife and her lover, then used the remaining bullet to shoot himself. Entering the 80s era, Amber started the decade by making a documentary video about Eddie's daily life behind the scenes. She made the video alone, starting from the shooting, editing, and even for the interview session. In the video, Amber tried to show that Eddie, who played a role in action films, never used violence in the real world. The short documentary video not only highlighted Eddie but also Jack Reed and Maya. All of this was made with Amber's hard work for Eddie, the person she loves so much. A few months later, something bad happened. Jack got a call from the police saying that Colonel was being held in prison. After Jack found out that Colonel brought an underage child to his house and left that child to enjoy cocaine until he overdosed, Colonel admitted that he didn't know that the child was still underage because he looked very mature. What made Jack very surprised was that the police also found cassettes of adult films starring children, but again, Colonel swore that he never had any intention of doing so. The film cassettes were just for enjoyment. Jack was confused about whether to turn his back on Colonel or defend him because Jack hated the exploitation of children. Not long after that, the phone was cut off, indicating that visiting hours were over. Since then, Jack had never seen or contacted Colonel again. 2 years after Colonel was arrested, to be precise, in December 1982, Becky finally married the man she met at a New Year's party. She invited the entire production crew and the actors who worked for Jack to the party. Becky announced that she would quit the adult film industry and would move to Bakersville with her husband. Everyone was happy for her. Eddie was no exception. But his happiness turned into annoyance when he saw Jack interviewing young man. Eddie was sure that the young man would soon debut as a new actor, and this, of course, made him feel competitive. He showed an indifferent attitude and then left there when asked to get to know the young man. A month later, after the wedding, Eddie started using drugs more and more often with his new friend Todd. Jack hated it when Eddie used drugs because his acting was often disappointing, but Eddie, who felt he was his star, never. He and Jack got into a fight. At first, Jack was preparing the property when suddenly Eddie came and insisted on starting filming immediately, which of course couldn't be done because the preparations weren't finished. Jack saw him under the influence of drugs at that time and kindly asked him to rest at home while waiting for the set to finish. But Eddie got mad out of nowhere and forced Jack to choose between himself and the new actor. The new actor didn't accept it and almost fought with him. Jack, who had lost his temper, finally fired Eddie, but instead of feeling bad for what he had done, Eddie cursed everyone there and said that they wouldn't be able to do anything without him. Since that incident, Eddie changed profession to a singer. On March 3rd, he rented a recording studio and paid someone to make songs for him, but his voice was very bad and there were lots of bad notes. In a condition where he no longer had any income, Eddie and his friends continued to use drugs almost every day. This addiction led Eddie to use all his savings. He didn't even have enough money to make up for the recording of his song. Instead of reflecting on his mistake, Eddie and Reed got angry at the studio owner and in the end were dragged out of there because they almost beat up the studio owner. Besides Eddie, after leaving the adult film industry, Buck tried his luck by opening a sound system shop and tried to apply for a loan from a bank in his city. But unfortunately, the bank refused, is because they did not give loans to former adult film actors. This made Buck offended because he felt discriminated against. He even begged because the loan was his only hope of being able to open a business and finance his pregnant girlfriend. Unfortunately, the bank who managed to survive. He finally accepted Gondoli's suggestion to distribute films via cassette, hanged with capital from Gondoli. Jack almost updated all the shooting equipment so that the resulting images were clearer and more colorful. Eddie's film that he didn't finish was continued by the new actor, and it still sold well in the market. Eddie had reached the point where he would do anything for drugs, including selling his pride. One night, he was picked up by a man who wanted to see him please himself. When they stopped in a quiet place, several people came and immediately beat Eddie to a pulp. It turned out they had planned to rob him because they knew he was a famous actor who definitely had a lot of money, but in reality, they only found a few dollars and Eddie was completely beaten up. In another place, Buck stopped at the mini market to buy donuts for his wife when suddenly someone came with a gun and asked the cashier to hand over all the money in the register. Buck was too scared to do anything, but the customer there with the hat tried to stop the robber. Buck told him not to do anything, but the robber thought that Buck was trying to fight him. Luckily, the man in the hat quickly shot the robber dead, but he also got shot and accidentally shot the cashier too before he died. Buck was the only one who was unharmed at that time. Amid his fear, Buck saw the money that the robber had dropped. He thought for a moment and decided to take the money and run away. Meanwhile, Eddie was increasingly threatened with poverty and no income. Todd finally gun at Dennis. Dennis's bodyguards came to stop them, and a gunfight occurred, but Todd managed to finish them off. He immediately chased Dennis, who ran into his room. But who would have thought that Dennis had prepared? Eddie tried to save themselves, but an attack from Dennis made the two of them split. Reed ran to the residential area nearby while Eddie chased his car, and then left as quickly as possible from there. Confused about where else to go, Eddie dared himself to go to Jack's house. There, he begged to be accepted back and apologized for his attitude back then. Seeing Eddie's very chaotic condition, Jack felt sorry for him. He accepted him back and forgave everything. Since then, Jack's life and the people around him turned into a better day. Buck succeeded in opening his store and made a promotional video using Jack's help, and not long after, his son was born normal and healthy. Reeve, who came to big events or imitations. Maya finally quit the adult film industry and took exams to equalize his high school diploma. Meanwhile, Eddie returned to being an adult film actor under Jack's. In his latest film, he starred in a role with Amber. He tried to build his self-confidence again after not being in front of the camera for a long time.